Well, I messed up in my previous review and I recorded it without audio. So, in a way, that was kind of a test run, and this hopefully will be shorter. But, kind of funny I'm saying this is going to be shorter when this is a chunker of a book, right? Of Empires and Dust, the fourth book in the Bound and the Broken, well, the fourth full novel in the Bound and the Broken series by self published author Ryan Cahill, now partnered with Broken Binding. Well, Of Empires and Dust comes out for everyone March 31st. I'm very grateful to be part of the advanced reader team. And I got the book almost a month early. I just finished it last night. So I've had time to process it because let me tell you, it is overwhelming, right? Now, first, I just want to say that I'm very grateful to Mr. Cahill. This series means a lot to me. But this will be an honest review, right? Because honesty is very important. Well, thankfully, I think this book is fantastic, right? I think it's fantastic. I will say, as of now, I think I prefer Of War and Ruin, and that's not because, say, Empires and Dust is like worse than War and Ruin. It's just that I feel like the quality jump from the first book of Blood and Fire to Darkness and Light, it's like, whoa, okay. But then you go from Darkness and Light to War and Ruin, and that quality jump is so big. It was so big, and it made for such a great experience. I feel like with Of Empires and Dust, it's not so much the quality goes down. It's more like it's the, and by quality I mean also scope. It kind of is staying the same in a way, and so that doesn't have that same level of impact for me. That being said, emotional impact, hell yeah. This is by far the darkest, heaviest, and most emotional book in the series. There's certain times, especially towards the end, I had to actually put the book down for a bit, and I had to let my eyes water. I'm not gonna hide that. This is the exactly what the series needed at this point after Of War and Ruin. It starts out with kind of a cooldown, which is expected and necessary. That being said, criticism that I have, I guess it's more of a nitpick, but so Cahill is at his best when he's writing his characters. I mean, the characters are so good, and I feel like the cast is so huge. The quality of writing is so good that you still want to care about each and every one of them. And this world is so big and so well developed that honestly, it could be really overwhelming keeping track of all these characters, especially because Cahill, I've noticed, doesn't really rely on physical description as much as some other authors. Looking at you, Robert Jordan, and so that makes it a little difficult for me personally to really visualize and distinguish these characters. Now, the way they're written is fantastic. I think Cahill's at his best when he's writing small character interactions and especially like banter. Right, we get that a lot with like Magnus, with Dan Pym, etc. But I think that I don't know if this has been a thing for the whole series. I will say that it's been a hot minute since I've read any of them. I wanted to reread leading up to this, but I got sucked into Stormlight Archive, and you know how that goes. But I feel like, especially in the first third of this book, that uh, there's a kind of an over reliance on these big sweeping monologues, and I mean that's cool, but it can be a little exhausting personally for me when I'm on my Kobo, right, and I see at the bottom character is starting a dialogue, or I guess a monologue, and then I turn the page and it's like, oh, that's like the rest, this whole page basically. I'm not saying Cahill needed to add like break up the monologues with just kind of character like nodding his head or something. I'm not saying that. It's a choice, but I felt like with how long this book is, early on, it's a little daunting. It kind of cools down. It still happens so often, but it kind of cools down. Now, this is a spoiler-free review, so eventually I will do a spoiler discussion once the book is actually out and people have had time to read it. But as I said, this is the darkest one in the series. And I think that what this book does very well, and what it really the series needed at this point, is it really goes deep into the cosmology. And that's something I've been wanting for a while, because we get in the glossary all these, not like these gods and then these like different sections of gods, right? Like the druidic gods, and so on and so forth. We get a lot more of that here. And I don't think that's a spoiler to say because, this war is ramping up in scale, right? So I'm just going to leave it vague like that. There's a specific chapter, I believe it's chapter 68, that you're going to want to highlight, okay? You're going to want to highlight a lot of those sections, and it might make you want to actually go back and reread the series because you learn so much more context in a way that feels very natural. And it felt like if I knew when I was reading, I could probably pick up on some of those seeds that were planted. So I love when a series does that, right? Wheel of Time does that very well, very well. If we're going to the characters, we have our trio, Kaylin, Rist, and Dan. I've always really loved Dan because he's very clearly inspired by Matt, and I just love like the powerless character, right, versus everyone who's really powerful. But I've always felt like Dan has sort of meandered a lot in these books, and he's kind of just tagging along others, like the elves. Well, he gets to shine in this book, and his strengths really come through. I think this is a very much a Dan-centric book, and that's what I was really wanting. I mean, that being said, there is kind of a recurring gag regarding Dan that it was amusing, but it kind of overstayed its welcome. You're gonna know pretty quickly once you're actually reading it what I'm referring to. It's amusing, but it's just like it keeps coming back, and then it doesn't have like a real payoff. So it was just kind of strange. But it's not like it was horrible or cringy or anything. It was just it felt a little awkward and played out for me. I think Rist, once again, man, he's got the best story in this book. And it's a story that, in lesser hands, could have been really bad, right? But Cahill's a good writer, and Rist is handled really, like, as well. This is like, the best possible execution of this type of plot regarding him. And it gets a lot of development that we really have needed to see without going to spoilers, and I was very, very satisfied with where Rist ends up. I've always been a Rist fan. I know Shoot Me, right? The implications of that. But it's not because of what he does or how he acts. It's just because like I see the vision, right? And that vision is coming to fruition, and I'm very happy about that. This series takes a lot of turns, this book in particular, and you're going to be shocked at some of the stuff. Now, to be critical, right? The other things I was saying were nitpicks. This is more of a direct criticism. Personally, Dane Atarius has always been maybe my favorite character, and a lot of that is because of the excellent novella, The Exile, which is focused on him. I felt like this book didn't really do him justice, and I've always felt like that his plot and really the Voltaren rebellion in general just feels very isolated from the rest of the series, and I knew that it was going to converge, right? And we start to see that here, but it's a little too little at this point. And just in general, how Dane is handled, it just didn't really make me happy. And we're just gonna have to see where it goes from here. But I felt like his plot is probably the one plots in this book that wasn't really doing it for me. Now, that's one plot out of many, okay? This is a huge book, and really, there's kind of a dialogue that's been going on about whether books should really earn their length or not. I know this was, like, brought up a lot regarding Sanderson and the Stormlight books, but I wanted to share, actually, a quote that Ryan Cahill said that was pretty insightful when someone was in the Discord talking about this kind of discourse, and said, kind of like as a quip, that this person doesn't really like when a book can be too short. And Ryan said, and I quote, "I think they are distinctly different things. A 400-page book still has to earn its page count. If a 400-page book has 200 pages of fluff, it hasn't earned its page count. But a 400-page book isn't required to have the same level of interconnectedness and the same impact as a 1,400-page book. I've always viewed it like a piece of string. The longer you stretch that string, the tighter it becomes, and the larger the pow should be when you finally let go. The longer the book, the more potential for a larger pow at the end." Now, let me tell you that this book does pack quite a pow at the end. So if you're concerned about the length and that it might meander, it really doesn't. It really doesn't. This series, these books they fly by, right? They do not feel as long as they really are. So if you are just watching this video because of the hype for this next book, but you're a little afraid to get into it, don't be afraid, man. This is a great, great series. I will keep recommending it and keep fighting for it. Support indie authors, support self-pub. And really, this series is for if you like that classic fantasy, if you don't mind tropes, if you like the farm boy that becomes the chosen one. This is one of the best executions of it I've seen. It's done with like honesty, it's done in good faith, it's done with just good quality writing, and the writing itself is very modern. Like if you don't like slang or swears, you might have a problem with this, but if you want it, it makes it feel a little fresh and contemporary while still being very classical in character and structure. And I think that's a really nice balance. It's darker and edgier than a lot of other series, but it never goes into full grimdark territory. The point of this whole series is really about like trauma and grief and processing it, and how sometimes that processing isn't pretty, sometimes it's ugly, right? Like this book, I mean, it is brutal, it really is, and you will feel that weigh down on you by the end. And speaking of that, I'm really excited to see where this last book goes. I'm kind of terrified, and when you read it you'll see why, okay? But to kind of conclude, yes, this is a fantastic book. I don't think it's my favorite. Again, it's not so much because it was like worse than Of War and Ruin. It's just that I didn't feel that huge jump in quality compared to Darkness and Light and War of Ruin. My qualms aside, of course, that's just me being honest, okay? It's fantastic. It really is. And really, you're here for those characters. You're here for those characters. Make sure you take notes, okay? Make sure you take notes, because Cahill doesn't really make it easy for you, because again, he's just like, we're going here and we're going here and we're gonna check in on these characters, okay? But if you're okay with that, if you're gonna get on the wild ride, yeah, do so, man, and you will not be disappointed. Peace.